What's up, developers? Today I have a very special video for you. We are doing mock technical interviews with two junior developers, Michael and Carlos. Conducting the interview today is Lusen Mendel. Now, Lusen is not only a volunteer teacher and mentor with coding schools and community college students, but they also spent time as an engineer manager at Rackspace and Indiegogo, as a professional interviewer and director of interviewing at Carrot, and last but not least, an interview coach at Dangor Mendel. These two developers are in great hands today. Before we get to the nitty-gritty with the interview, I had a few questions to ask Lusen. We're going to go over those, and then the bulk of this video is these two guys, Carlos and Michael, trying to scratch out the solution to this problem.
Give me some background about your history with software, how you got involved in it, and kind of that evolution to what you're doing today.
Sure. Well, I started off as a programmer. I got a couple computer science degrees from MIT, went into programming. I had a couple startups, worked at some startups, was just trying to do that, career development from entry level to becoming senior and getting into architecture and design decisions. And somewhere along the way, I got really involved in middle management. And that brought me into figuring out, how do we hire engineers? How do we do performance management? What does it mean to be good at engineering? What are the skills and competencies? And so I was doing a bunch of interviews, and and eventually, also just through this work, I did a bunch of mentoring, and I ran a couple intern programs. And just along the way, because I've been doing this for quite some time, I eventually moved into working directly with candidates. For a while, I was working with employees, trying to make things better for employees, like trying to help individuals understand, like, what is your manager thinking? What is the organization thinking when they're conducting a performance review or when you ask for a raise? And these days, I work almost, I would say 80 to 90% of the people I work with. I have a small business with a buddy of mine, and we work primarily with candidates and helping candidates figure out how to find and apply for jobs, how to network. And we do a lot of interview practice and preparation, both technical for programmers and also behavioral, how to talk about past work, how to tell your story in a way that's going to resonate with hiring managers. We also do some negotiation preparation and practice as well.
Okay, and this is all stuff you've pretty much picked up over your career, working in all these different backgrounds and stuff. It's not like you just sat down and like read a PDF and it was like, okay, I'm gonna start this now. Like, this is from your actual experience over the years.
Yeah, exactly. I graduated with my bachelor's in 2006, so I've been working since then. And just one thing kind of leads to the other. It's very interesting how that happens, and it's a long transition. When I'm starting off in my career, there's so much I didn't know. Like, I really felt confused a lot of the time in my first job, especially. And you don't really imagine, like, I remember asking my first manager out of college. I had my first real programming job. I worked through college, but this was like my real programming job. And I was just blown away by how my manager, I asked him one day, how do you know to have that conversation? Or how do you know that this is what we want to hear? Like, everything just felt so new and confusing. And he was just like, I don't know, I just imagine like what would be helpful to me. And now, like 15 years later, it's I can kind of get that. It's just like, wow, it's weird to know things and to have a sense of perspective. I do try to break things down so I can teach others. I do a lot of trainings and workshops, and so sometimes you want more specific.
Yeah. So it's really practical though. Like, everything you're focusing on isn't just theoretical. Like, from your experience or talking with other people, that this is what you talk about and what you train on is what people are looking for.
Yeah, exactly. And especially so we're going to talk about, we're going to go through coding interviews today and look at how, as a candidate, how can you talk with your interviewer? How can you ask questions? How can you impress your interviewer? What do you do if you get stuck? And my experience with that is both as a candidate, applying for lots of different jobs, and also especially on the other side of that table, being a hiring manager, being an interviewer. I've conducted a few hundred, maybe even 1,000 interviews, I would say.
Wow.
I worked as a professional interviewer for a little while, specifically doing technical interviews. So,
Cool.
We're going to go through that.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. And then I just want to talk a little bit about the people you helped, because today we're talking with two junior developers. You know, they're new to the industry. What tips can you give, or what advice generally can you give to people looking for their first role? Because there's a lot of information out there, but what are some top things that are just immediately must focus on in order to stand out or succeed in a typical interview?
This is a huge question.
Okay.
Because it's such a wide, there's so many different ways that people get into programming and take different pathways, and there's a ton of different companies and roles out there. So it's going to be hard to give like one generic tip, but what I could say is that, so first of all, finding your first job is going to be the hardest job search you ever do. Every job after that's going to get easier because you're going to have a network, you're going to have some experience, some track record, some references. So your first job is going to be really hard. So I just say it's going to be a challenge.
Just get it out there. Yeah, just accept that it's going to be difficult. Okay.
And then the other thing is to also recognize that it is just a stepping stone. Like most of us don't go from 0 to 60. Suddenly we have our dream job after, we do some study. There's going to be a pathway, and you're going to learn things as you have a job, and that's going to open up different interests and doorways. So the other side of it is just to remember, it's kind of like there's a lot of fish in the sea. Like it can feel like when you're a candidate that there's nothing out there, that you're really having a hard time until something lands. So there's tons of jobs. And I guess maybe it's to sort of break down, figure out what your strengths are, and see if you can find an opportunity that matches with your strengths. If you really love solving coding problems, like sort of like the HackerRank style, there's going to be companies that have interview processes that rely on that. But if that's not your strength, if you really prefer to build a portfolio of like a working application and have that be more how you impress a hiring manager or how you find work, there's going to be opportunities that look at that. So some of it might be like navigating in that way. If you are early in your career, one of the pieces of advice that I often give to folks is to find work. So one is to play to your strengths, and the other thing is to look for places with opportunity to learn from people, opportunity of growth. I know that's the timing of this is a little difficult right now. I don't know how many companies are growing. Maybe apply to work at Zoom and Slack. But just that sometimes anytime that you're working somewhere where there's lots of opportunity, that can be a boon for your career and your own development. And that can then lead to more opportunities later.
Awesome. So kind of tying into this, soon enough, in a few minutes, you're going to be doing these mock interviews with these two candidates. And part of the scenario is that you're going to play a not so fantastic interviewer. So can you kind of expand upon that? Just kind of talking about the reality of going to these interviews. We prep for these interviews. We have all these materials and study prep and stuff. But when you get there, sometimes we have the perception that it's just going to be so maybe modular or granular. I don't know what the word is. But just so almost transactional. But that's not the case. Because sometimes the interview is just really, they're out to lunch or they're asking weird questions. Can you kind of touch upon that real quick about the reality of that? Totally.
Well, yeah, there's some things here are, first of all, that we often, when we're practicing, especially for these coding interviews, where we can go to HackerRank or LeetCode or even Glassdoor and find these problems and then solve them on our own and think, okay, I got to get to the right solution. And getting to the right solution is part of the skill assessment. These interviews are trying to assess how well you can write code and what data structures and algorithms are you familiar with and can you apply. But it's a conversation. So one of the things that can be really valuable is to not just practice solving problems alone, where you're just writing code by yourself, but to practice where you have another individual. So where you're getting to explain your approach before you write code, have a conversation, just get used to having someone watching what you do. I mean, it can just be nerve-wracking to have someone watch what you're doing, right? So that kind of practice can be really helpful. And then I'll be trying, the whole point of this video is not to actually assess and critique our candidates who are play acting being candidates.
Right.
But it's really to look at what are some of the ways that you can interact with your interviewer in a way that will help you make a connection and impress them. Because one, you get information by having someone that you're talking to. This is really nice. And when you're just filling out like a homework challenge, if you're confused about something, like there's no one to ask. But during an interview, you get to save time by asking questions. But you also kind of have to manage that social interaction. Ideally, the interviewer is able to be a great host and be encouraging and supportive and be clear and provide this really nice experience so that you can just write code and have that technical conversation. Mm-hmm. But they might not be that way. They might be new to interviewing. They might be nervous. They might be stressed out by what's going on. They might be trying to fix a bug and they suddenly had this meeting come up. So at least we can practice a little bit how to not take that personally and how to, kind of take that, level up a little bit in how we interact with them. Right. So that's what we're going to try to practice.
Awesome. Okay. Final question, and then I think we'll get rolling. What is the purpose of a technical interview anyway?
Interviews in general, before engineering skill assessments, were often conversational. So an interviewer might ask you, oh, you used to work at MoneyCore, so explain to me what you did there and what that was like. And the problem with those interviews that people ran into, especially when asking about technical work, is that someone might describe this wonderful architecture and this really cool system that someone else designed. And so now you're trying to hire this person to build some piece of software, and it turns out they don't know how to do it. They just were witnessing a great solution that someone else did. So people can, and even just more generally, sometimes those interviews, people's confidence can make them seem much better than they really are, right?
Right.
So the skill assessment is a reaction to that. So in these general conversational interviews, this idea of a false positive. You might hire someone, you might make a positive assessment. Hey, Carlos.
Carlos.
We're just finishing up a Q&A. You might make so in these conversational interviews, you might make a positive assessment of someone. A hiring manager might decide to move someone forward, but it's a false positive. Maybe they were confidently overselling themselves. So the skill assessment, it's a reaction to that. There's this idea, well, let's have someone write some code. Let's have someone design a system so that we can see what kind of problem solving skills and communication skills they have when it comes to this skill. And it's not just in engineering. There's skill assessments for other roles, especially at tech companies, product manager, maybe someone has to give a presentation, other things like that. And this is really great in that it's really hard to confidence your way into knowing an algorithm that you don't know. Right. So you definitely cut down on false positives. Unfortunately, it does introduce false negatives, right? It's very easy for a candidate to get confused by a question and then answer the wrong question. And so it looks like they didn't do a great job, to get confused or to get intimidated, to choke up, to, just to like forget something. As we get nervous, like that really does impact how we think and how we solve problems. So hopefully interviewers are keeping that in mind. But as candidates, the way that we can, prepare for these situations is just practice, practice, practice. So that by the time it's happening, our game day, we feel like we're just executing everything that we've already learned and doing our best. And then we just see what happens.
Carlos and Michael are new to software development, and they're here to build up their skills. They're here to do these mock interviews. And I'm so excited. I know these guys were excited too. There's some energy in the room. And I'm not going to babble anymore because Lusen's a professional and knows what to do. So Lusen, take it away.
I'm a professional. Cool. So what we're going to do today is this is going to be an opportunity for Carlos and Michael to practice answering technical interview questions, coding questions. But in this case, it's not going to be about assessing you all. You will be playing candidates just as much as I'm playing an interviewer. And what I want to look at is how I'm going to try to do some different things. As an interviewer, maybe I will not explain a question very clearly. Maybe I'll go silent and you feel like, oh no, am I still there? Am I doing the right thing? Those sorts of things. Not that I'm necessarily being malicious. I might just be bad at interviewing. And this isn't meant to like trip you up. You guys might handle these situations in a great way. And we'll just have a conversation about that. You can share what your experience is like and what some of the things are that you think are can help with that. And I'll try to chime in as well. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Cool.
Sounds good.
All right, I'm out of here.
Okay. Cool. So here's what I'd like to do is, and so before we kind of dig in, I also just want to make sure we have a problem, or at least we start with a problem that is like new enough that you don't feel like you're totally like acting in a cheesy way, but something that's relatively familiar where you're like, oh yeah, I see, this feels like approachable to me. And we have, do we have 30 minutes or an hour? Should I try to time this for 30 minutes?
I think it was 30 minutes.
Let's do that. Great. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share a CoderPad link in the chat for the Zoom. So Carlos, I think I'm interviewing you first.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Michael, we'll use your observations as well if you want. Okay, Carlos, I see that you're in the CoderPad.
Yep.
And
is it okay if I change this to JavaScript?
Oh, that's interesting. For this interview, I'm really trying to assess Python.
Oh. I don't even know. I haven't used Python literally in years.
Yeah.
I've used it on and off. But I mean, I could try it. I mean, the syntax is easy enough to parse out. I mean, we can give it a shot.
So, Carlos, do you feel like we can continue in Python?
Yeah, sure.
This was actually, I was going to role play this in an interview. So I actually don't mind personally. You can use any language, and I think probably you should use JavaScript.
Okay, cool.
But here's the thing. Sometimes, let's say, first of all, I really liked how you immediately saw, hey, it's in Python. I would rather use JavaScript. And didn't feel, the thing what I wouldn't want you to do is, as a candidate, feel like you had to use Python just because the interviewer made that assumption. At least have a conversation, at least ask the interviewer. There are some interviews where it has to be in a specific language. Ideally, you've already asked the recruiter ahead of time to know, So, cool. But yeah, that's great. Let's go back to JavaScript because that's totally fine. And I was expecting that because I saw some of your materials ahead of time.
Can I just interrupt and say, oh my God, I'm over here be like, yes, this is awesome. All right, bye.
Cool. Great. So, well, why don't we start with a question, Carlos? But you can tell me just immediately and break character if you're just like, this isn't where we should go at all. Okay?
Okay.
Or maybe let me ask you this. How comfortable do you feel with like iterating through strings or arrays and like processing?
I'm fine. I feel comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Totally. What about like hash maps or graphs?
Hash maps. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. Cool. Okay.
Feel pretty good about them.
Yeah. Perfect. Again, because I didn't come up with questions to trip you up or anything.
Okay.
But I'll probably try to get through 2 in the next, I guess, 20 minutes. Is that how much longer we have?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, we'll see what we can do.
Okay.
How about... Okay, so here's what I'd like you to do, Carlos. I would like you to write... Sorry, I'm going to change this up already.
All right.
Okay. Here's what I'd like you to do. We're writing this program that's like a text, like an audio transcriber. So it like listens to audio and sort of figures out what people are saying. And, people aren't always like great at pronouncing words. So what I'd like you to do, what I need you to do is to write a function that will accept a jumbled word and a dictionary and output the word that someone might have been saying. And for this purpose, it'll just be kind of like an anagram. So it's like our, you know, we have this word with some scrambled letters. You'll have a list of other words. You know, what is the match?
Okay.
What are the possibilities?
All right, cool. All right, let's give
Yeah.
that a shot. Do I erase what's here now? Is the loadout is a little example here?
Yep.
Okay. So, so this is like an unscramble or a word match, I guess. I can call the
Yep.
function. And
Yep.
you said we'll take in a string?
Yeah, so
Correct.
what you'll have both the string, like the word that we like overheard someone say.
Okay.
But then you'll also take in like a list of like a dictionary almost of like possible words.
Okay, cool. And like if, let's say the word, it comes in as like something like this could be sad in the map.
Exactly.
Okay.
Guys, Carlos, is it possible you could share your screen?
Oh shoot,
Oh.
that was the thing.
Yes.
Thanks.
Totally.
Thank you.
Or another option is, Candy, can you or one of us could do a screen grab, use QuickTime to record the coder pad separately.
Oh.
What is easier for
it.
you?
He got it. Yeah, it's showing up, right? You guys are seeing it. Okay, cool.
I put it on.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So the word that comes in could be something just jumbled up. So like the first letter won't necessarily be the first letter in the map. It could be anything.
Yep.
Okay. And are we looking for multiple words that would match this, or the
Yep.
multiple words? Okay. So I would think that if in this example DSA that I got, we could build out like we could take the letters and build out all the possible combinations of those letters, check the map for words that match those combinations, and then return that, I guess, as what would be the return? Would it be like an array of matches? Okay.
Yeah.
So I would do, right, so we would take these letters and just arrange them in every possible combination of word. So there's 3 letters, that's what, like 9, something like that, combinations. And then iterate, like check the map for each of these iterations. If there's one that's correct, then we would push this into an array. Oops. I didn't mean to erase that. Have like an array of answers or matches. And it'd be an empty array to start. And so I guess that would be the way I would approach this. And so in order to come up with each of these combinations, I would probably have to, I'm trying to think, it'd probably be something recursive, maybe. Just to be able to find, I'm just thinking, what I'm thinking of is what's the best way that I can approach this to come up with the different versions of words? There's 3 letters. So if, like, for example, DSA, in this one example I would start with D, and then I'd have the next 2 letters. I'd have to try one combination with SA and then AS, and then go to S, and then take the other 2 combinations, and and go on, so on and so forth. So I probably would approach this recursively to then, I guess, spit out a whole array of all the possible words to then iterate through. And that might be something that can eventually be refactor down to not have to to do it in one go, but just to start, I probably would try something like that. Does that sound all right?
Yeah. What would be the runtime complexity of that?
Oh, well, that would be pretty. I mean, I could do recursively, maybe with, I think maybe memoization would improve the runtime of that. I mean, I'm guessing this is going to be something pretty hefty if I just do if I did like the naive approach and I just looped through and did multiple loops based on the words, that could be that could get ugly. It could be what is it, exclamation. It'd be pretty high, I think.
Yeah.
Recursively, I think it might be n squared.
What's n?
And it would be the number of letters in the word given.
Cool. What if this map was actually a list?
If it was like an array?
Yeah.
Oh, then it would be times n, because we would have to, with the map, it'd be O of 1, right? Finding a match. But if we have to look through the list for every word, and it'd be whatever the runtime of calculating every word, every possibility of word from the letters, every combination of letters times the size of that list.
Cool. Okay, let's pause.
Yeah.
You're doing great, Carlos. I was trying to be
cool.
I didn't really, I didn't really explain the problem well. I didn't even write anything down, right? Just verbally, explain something kind of fuzzily, like a little vague problem, use my hands. And you did a great job right away of figuring out, well, is this an example? Did I understand what I'm supposed to do? Because you have limited time. You have limited time to show your skills. You don't want to waste time. You don't want to go solve the wrong question. So getting some sample input and output, that's very helpful. I think you could have, even just to make this even a little bit better, gone a little bit further and really tried to figure out, because I kind of left this, I called this function here, I used both the word list and map and dictionary, right?
Right.
And so, to be honest, in my head, I was thinking of a list of words. Now, of course, you're naturally thinking, if this is a real world problem, we have a dictionary. We literally have a mapping, probably. So it wasn't a bad thing to think of, but it does make the problem a little more complicated, potentially.
Yes.
Because if this list were short, if you just had a list of 5 words, you maybe would just, there's some other approaches. You could just check whether this word, maybe you sort everything and then check or something.
Right.
Whereas if this is a huge map, then your approach, that's a great idea. This word is probably smaller to figure out all the combinations and then do a constant lookup.
Yeah.
If I'm summarizing things correctly. So, and so I think you did great. You did an A+ would be to really, clarify this input and the output. I like how you also figure, hey, what output? What should I return? But just go that extra mile to really make sure we're certain on that. And potentially that lets you then explore multiple options before committing to something. That said, you explained your approach well. If this were on a whiteboard, you could even write down, you could really make sure the interviewer is following along with your approach. I was trying to be really silent, as you explained things. Potentially, sometimes an interviewer will secretly let you have bugs that you find out later. Or they might not really understand what you're doing. Usually then they'll ask a bunch of questions. So yeah, I would say the second thing is when I asked about complexity, which isn't always, not everyone's going to ask about that. And you had a pretty good handle on it. At least you kind of, it made it seem that way. How do you,
Yeah, I think I'm fairly comfortable with complexity. I just, in this case, I didn't have a handle on exactly what the complexity would be to actually come up with an iteration of every letter. And so I think I started stumbling because I started thinking, well, what's the worst case? And the worst case I think would be N or N exclamation, right? Where I'm having to iterate,
Yeah.
make a loop for every single like slot of letter, and then, have this gigantic
Yeah.
loop,
Yeah. Here's my 2 tips for complexity. And Candy, did you want to chime in with something?
Yeah, I had a follow-up question when you're done with your complexity tips. Yeah.
Great. So the first thing with complexity, it's kind of like the same with coding, where the first thing when someone asks a coding question is figure out what the input and output are. And, even this was maybe a straightforward question, even some other times there's like, edge cases and really clarify everything. For complexity, figure out what your terms are before you even start. So like you have a function with 2 variables. There's at least going to be 2 terms. Say
Right.
W for the length of word, M for the number of items in map, say.
Okay.
And so then that kind of helps you with, so what is your big O in terms of W and M, for example? And you were sort of saying it's like whatever the, make all words, which is, maybe W, it's something big. We don't know. And my second tip is just use the, don't try to optimize, just use whatever the worst case is probably.
Okay.
So it's like, maybe, this is, I don't even, to be honest, I don't know. I'm just like, that would be like worst case. Maybe we can be a little smarter than that. We're picking, we have W choices the first time, and then I don't know, times, and then there's that next step of going through the map, which we said is just going to be however many. Another thing you could do is say, well, let's use X equals the number of words that we make in our scramble.
Okay.
It'll definitely be O of however much it takes to like make X.
Right.
plus O of X or something. Anyway, defining the terms can help, and you can have a conversation. And even if sometimes you have to get a little fuzzy, like even with your code, you're describing your algorithm, like it's, make all the words and then like iterate through words and check map, return that list. And even though you're like, I don't exactly know how to do this, but I have a really nice breakdown for this problem. And the interviewer, I think as an interviewer, it's way more impressive to see the end-to-end big ideas. And then, hey, this is one function, this is another function. If we have time, you'll go through and maybe we'll get to a working solution. But it's much nicer to see this overall thing. Then it's very hard to evaluate. If you kept getting stuck on like halfway through,
Right.
I'd be like, well, does Carlos even know the big picture? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
I'd like to have the whole breakdown of this is going to be the process. Whether or not I've figured it out or not is like that's at this stage, I'm just writing down my steps.
Yeah. Like I want, it's great to get to that figure out point, but it's like, that's well abstracted. We'll get into there when we get there. And if we run out of time, you've still impressed me at the first level. So yeah, you did a great job. Candy, what was your follow-up question?
So Carlos rocked this. My first question is, how common of a problem is this? Or this kind of caliber of problem for junior developers? And at what point would you say, oh man, he just doesn't get it? And is that a make or break if he didn't know what to do or how to proceed with the question?
Yeah, well, and different companies are going to have different ideas about how to even go about making a hiring decision. Like some places might give sometimes there's an interview where it's, here's some code here, we're building a React application and you're a React developer. So here's a simple React program and we're going to add a feature together, or you're going to debug something. And other places and some places will do lots of different things because you're trying to assess lots of different skills. And if the more types of interviews that someone is doing to make a hiring decision, often it doesn't mean they're looking for you to ace everything. They're just trying to build a well-rounded team.
Right.
But often coding questions like this are early in the pipeline, either as a phone screen or maybe a take-home coding challenge, or as a sort of first round, or it could be part of an on-site. And so, and usually there's like a spectrum of skill and someone's trying to assess. Generally, if someone's asking you to like implement a function, which is pretty specific, and also you can ask the interviewer this question. Sorry, let me just back up and say there's 2 kinds of interviews at the extreme when it comes to coding. One is having this conversation. Maybe I'm trying to assess can I talk with Carlos about different solutions and different complexities and how to break a problem down? Maybe I'm not looking, maybe I never intended for us to necessarily get fully working code. But there's other kinds of interviews where you get the most points for getting fully working code. And if you don't get fully working code or close to it, I'm like, oh, you're not ready.
Right. And one thing I was noticing when he was answering this question was that, Carlos, you were talking through it. You were just throwing out the possibilities and then, kind of describing what you were doing. There are some candidates who don't say anything, and that's not good, right?
I think that's generally not good. You can, as a candidate, ask your interviewer what they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can ask the interviewer, are there multiple questions? Like, basically, you want to know, are you about to ask me, 10 different coding questions and we're going to move on as soon as I get a working solution, and you don't care? If I were to analyze complexity for 10 minutes, I'd actually be wasting time. How much, it's hard to, how you word this. I mean, interviewers maybe don't like the tables being turned so much, but you can try to get a sense for what someone's looking for. And you did that, Carlos. You're like, well, should I implement this now? What are my, what's my next step? Versus, you could ask someone, would you like me to analyze different approaches, or do you want a more optimal approach? That sort of thing. By the way, with optimality, sometimes even if you don't know the solution, you can still figure out what the minimum optimality would be. Like, we know with this input, we're at least going to have to, well, this one's a kind of a tricky one, but we're at least going to have to either look through everything in map or look at all of the word, combinations. So there's no constant time solution to this problem.
Right.
We know that much. So sometimes, even if you don't know the most optimal solution, you can at least say, well, what I have is pretty good. Like, what I have is as optimal as it gets, and kind of move on. But back to that earlier point of figuring out, trying to, as you're doing things with an interviewer, you can ask those questions. Maybe it's a question where you need to implement like a stack or a graph or something. And you could say, would you like me to design, classes and an abstract data type? Or can I use a hash map, and can we do this a little down and dirty? Are you just looking for a working solution? Or are you looking for me to design something?
The thing was, too, not to get off topic what you just said, because that was awesome, but going back earlier, it's a quality ramble. It wasn't a ramble. It was awesome. So going back to the Python thing, where Michael and Carlos were like, oh, wait a minute, Python, like totally just like throwing them for a loop. Like, what? Talk about that type of interviewer setting that tone, and how it threw both those guys off real bad. And me too. I'm just like, oh, they went for no.
Okay. Yeah. Here's what I'd say. And I guess also, just maybe on that last question, to be brutally honest, some places are going to look for a certain level of performance and problem solving and result. And it's like, to me, it's like sports. I love sports. So maybe everything's sports. That's my hammer. But, you do a lot of practice, you do a lot of preparation. And then when it comes to the championship, sometimes you have it, sometimes you don't. And in those moments, all you can do is your best. So, and as much as possible, your recruiter is your friend, because your recruiter definitely wants you to succeed, and they can tell you what to expect. They can tell you the topic of the interview, what to prepare for, what your interviewers will be looking for. They can tell you if you need to use a certain language or not. So generally, you want to use the programming language that you know the best, and that you can be the most impressive in, that you don't have to look up documentation, that you've been practicing in already. But if you get to the game day and the interviewer is like, now you need to use Python, what can you do, right?
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, Carlos, any questions or anything more?
No, that's great. That was really helpful. I think I definitely am a little rusty. I haven't gone through a lot of challenges and stuff, so this is really good to jump into and tackle.
Carlos, I would love to do a follow-up with you, maybe some other time, maybe on the weekend or evening sometime, where we could try like 45 minutes.
Okay.
And because we did the conversational part, but I would like to do two things. One is the programming, especially say using something like CoderPad. Like this kind of changes everything. Then it's very different than a whiteboard, for example, because you have a compiler and so forth. So how do you, like, even with this problem, like making all those words, it's easy to get lost in debugging. So what are some ways that you can help yourself out to get through problems with a little less risk in an interview? Because the time really matters in an interview. And maybe even something a little more challenging, because I got the sense that you would definitely solve this one fine.
Cool.
But
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, if you want, we can try to schedule something some other time, even just for your own practice.
Sure, that'd be great.
Cool. All
Thanks
right.
for putting up with this interview. Yeah, it's very courageous
Yeah.
of you.
Thanks,
Good job,
Carlos.
Carlos.
Yeah. Woo!
Can I stick around for Michael's?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
I didn't know if you were
Carlos,
under pressure. What's
No,
that?
I got some time.
Okay. Cool.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I thought you had like a hard stop as well. So
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I took a later lunch, so I'm good to go.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah.
Well-
I'll buzz off again, and unless I need to do anything, I think I'm good. I think I'm just gonna buzz off.
Cool. Michael, how did you feel about this problem?
I'm just sitting there. I'm basically looking at this. I'm thinking about ways I could have possibly addressed it. That was after the initial, like, oh crap moment, But the way that Carlos dived in, I was highly impressed.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I'm saying is, would you like to implement a solution to this problem, or should I come up with a different one?
Let's give this one a shot.
Yeah. Would you like to? Great. Would you like to try this this approach that make all the words, and then iterate through the words?
Okay,
Does that
so
make
my
sense?
first question would be this. Are we using some kind of dictionary API here to, like, basically see if one of the scrambled words is in fact a word?
Let's pretend that, like map in this case, it's actually just an object.
Okay,
So
so
like
it is in fact a dictionary object that we're basically taking these scrambled words and putting them up against to determine whether or not they are in fact a valid word.
Exactly. Trying to, I guess, DSA, there's not a lot of let's use like ports or something. So
Okay.
if with ports, we'd want it to return sports. Ports is a word. Maybe we need a different one, but something like that. And so in our map, it might have, like it sort of might look like that, and we're trying to figure out. Does this make sense? This input?
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at a kind of bigger picture, like a very large, like Merriam-Webster kind of, database API that we'd be going up against, but
There might be definitions here, but we would ignore that.
Oh, okay, so do I have to switch screens or do something of that nature? Or
Yeah. Could you hit the share screen button?
okay, let's see. Share screen is located where in the interface?
It should be right in the center, on the bottom bar.
Aha. Hitting share. And we are going with the coder pad. And there we go.
By the way, your question is a great example of how, if this were like a whiteboard interview, it'd be a lot easier for me as the interviewer to say, sure, here's your API, because it doesn't really matter. But since this is code that we can execute, right, we can click run and see what happens. It's harder for me to introduce, like a random dependency.
Okay, so I would probably, can I start with a little bit of pseudocode?
Yep.
Yeah, I'll just like start with the comments, and then if we want, we could build it out from there. Okay.
I'm getting some blinking here. Why don't I try to share my screen? Are you guys seeing that as well?
Yeah, I'm getting that a little bit too.
Yeah, same here.
So
Here.
Looks
If,
good. Oh,
if you want to stop sharing, Carlos or Michael, I'll go ahead and see if I can share.
okay, bear with me here. I got to figure out how to do this.
Yep. I like your background.
Okay. How do I stop sharing?
If you click on the share or press escape, maybe
Oh, stop share. There we go. My bad.
you got it.
cool.
Got it in. So, okay. And should I still type, or are you going to do the typing?
Nope, you're all you for typing.
It's all me. Stand by. I just got to toggle between windows here. Got it. Oh, no, I don't. Stand by. Here we go. Now I'm in the app. Yay. Okay, so the word that we're going to be playing with is sports, right? Okay. Bear with me here.
Yeah, I'll put some examples in.
Okay. First thing I would do is, okay, let's see. Let's get a jumbled word. Can I make up a jumbled word, or okay, boards and ocean.
Yep.
Okay. And soccer.
So like, yep.
Okay. So what we would do is this. Okay. We have 5 letters. That would be 25, right? Okay. I would first split the string into an array. An array. From the array, I would reduce the array into an empty array. So it'd kind of be similar to Carlos's, where we would have the result array starting off as empty. Okay. From that, we would take the word. We would split the word itself. Okay, we already split that. And then we would probably stand by thinking. I would take each letter of the word and shift its placement. Okay, effectively creating a new array for each jumble.
Is this result the whole result that this function's returning, or is this is this holding the number of the different combinations?
This would just hold the different number of the combinations.
Cool.
It's at that point that we would cycle through each of the combinations, rejoin them as a string, and then basically, throw it up against the map to see where the matches would be.
Right. So I look at this as interviewer, and I think you have something in mind. It doesn't, this to me doesn't look like enough. And maybe you're only halfway through. I think one thing that could be helpful when communicating this is to show me the example. Like, basically so one thing I like is that you're recording state. I like to know what the state is. This is also a lot easier on a whiteboard, but I like to know you have your input word. We have our combo array. I'm just going to call this the combo array so that it's a little more specific. Or let's call it combos.
Yeah.
And we kind of have to be like constructing these words somehow. And so I kind of want to know, and if this were on a whiteboard, I would say even make a table, have each of your states as headers, and then have your row sort of iterating through, and like just verbally, because sometimes a pseudocode's not bad, but sometimes it can sometimes take a little bit of time, and the interviewers are sort of waiting to see that what you have. And then there might be a step between full pseudocode and a high level explanation to kind of go through what's actually happening. Like, how are we going to take this word and start filling out combos?
So
we have letters. So it's not, we have this split the string into an array. So we have like the letters.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I would probably do it like.
And if it helps, you can sort of say like, we have this array sports. How are we gonna make all our combos?
Okay, so let's do this here. First thing we would do is const word letters equals word split. That would be the first step.
Sure.
Okay. Then we would do, and I would refactor this a little bit later on, but I'm just doing this step by step for now.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Here's, if I may interrupt, I would suggest, okay, if possible, coming up with a solution that we can talk about before even writing code. Now, sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes you're just like, I need to, get my hands dirty. I need to play with things. I need to touch the code to even come up with a solution. And that's okay. In fact, you can even just tell your interviewer, I don't fully know how this is going to work. Let me just play around with this and then I'll refactor it later. Let me just spend like 5 minutes and let me see what I can come to. And then we can talk about it. And maybe that's what's happening right now. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, basically when I wrote the pseudocode, that was an attempt to explain what type of approach I would take.
Oh, I guess as your interviewer, I'm telling you, I don't know that you have an approach that's going to work, because I don't understand how, if you do think it works, one thing you can do is say, okay, look, this is what I mean by shifting each letter. We start with sports and then we're going to create ports and then we're going to create, like, I'm just rotating things. Is that right? I think I've lost a letter at some point. There's an extra S. Like this, right? And that's what you're doing.
Right.
And the reason why you don't want to jump into writing code is that if you list this out, if you give me, like, walk through how the sample input gets to the output, because this actually, if you were to go, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to shift the words and now I have all my combos. Here we are. And then I would say, oh, that's great, but you've actually misunderstood the question. I could say, well, this is some of the combinations, but what about,
yeah, because there's like 25.
Also, I just realized, guys, I've given, my example isn't correct. This doesn't match ports. I came up with a bad example.
I thought that was part of your technique. I was like,
No.
oh, there's a trap right there.
No, this is just me being somewhat unprepared.
You see, I was under the impression
Yeah,
that the words that did not fit into the jumble
yeah.
be disposed of. Basically leaving the words, basically any word using that 5-letter combination.
Yep.
would be the output, would be the final output.
I'm so sorry. I just should have looked at my notes. So it's meant to be all there wasn't meant to be any guesswork here. It's meant to be an exact anagram match. So like sport would also match to ports.
Right.
But I'm trying to think, let's just pretend if there was a word like, I'm trying to think, is there another word here?
Torps, I guess that'd be short for torpedoes.
Is trops a word? Let's pretend trops was a word. Then, trops would also be a match. And the reason why that's important is because, let's just get rid of the double S. So this would be the combinations, the combos for sport, right?
Right.
In terms of shifting. But in terms of an like an anagram, it doesn't matter what order the letters are in. So trops would also be a valid part of the response.
Right.
In the same way that I just sort of gave this like different jumble, if this were the input and it was the same map, you'd want to return the same things.
Right.
So you've come up with some of the combinations, but there's other words that you're going to miss.
Those are the ones that are going to be like disposed of.
Yeah, like it could be, like, that, like there's all sorts of combinations, right?
Right.
So, yeah. And so in terms of, so one of the things here is that one, try again, spending, the more you can verify your approach and then even the details of your approach with the interviewer before writing code, that'll save time. Because otherwise you start implementing your solution. And maybe if I'm like a trickster interviewer, I might have understood this is what you said. And then I'd just be like, oh, wow, you're going to have a bug later. Guess I'll have to see how you handle that. Some interviewers though will like ask a question, oh, but what about these other words? And that gives you a chance to replan your approach. Because once you start writing code, especially in an interview, it's just the stakes are so high, it's really easy to get kind of confused and lost, even if you wouldn't normally. So I try to put off the, it's like measure twice before you cut that code, if that metaphor holds up. Yeah. Carlos, do you want to, can we like phone a friend? Carlos, do you have any input you want to add on how we might go about this? The constructing the combos.
Yeah, I mean, originally what I was thinking was, I haven't quite solved I guess we can arrange kind of what Michael's doing, where we're shifting the letters so that there's one version with, there's each of one version that has the starting letter is one of the other letters. Like in this case, there's 5 of them.
Yeah.
And then
this is definitely a good approach to begin with.
Yeah. And then I would probably do like, that's what I was thinking recursively, because then for every combination, so like looking at S port, you're going to have other words that are going to be formed by those 4 letters together with that S. So sport, you take S, you separate it, and you got P-O-R-T. And then you go down and, and you have it recursively go down till you get to, you have 2 letters. Well, if you have 1 letter, you return 1 letter, but your base case is 1 letter, return 1 letter, which could also be something that we could check beforehand to make sure there isn't just a 1 letter, the function isn't called with a word with 1 letter. But the base case I was thinking ideally would be 2 letters, in which case we return an array with, 1 letter, with like A, B, and then BA, right? We send that back, and then we apply the other letters that were separated, and we just go like, so if I'm looking at that first example, the SDA, I take S and I call it, and I recursive with D and A, and I return DA, AD. I just add the S to the DA
Yep.
and the AD, and so on and so forth. And that would branch out to cover all the letters.
Yep.
My question would be this, okay? And I'm looking at this from a sustainability thing. Let's say that the map changes. Let's say that that a new word is added in the Urban Dictionary, or trops is no longer a word as per higher management.
Right.
How do we make this function so it's a little more sustainable and bulletproof?
Yeah.
How would we which is why I wanted to do the, basically the 25 combo approach, and then just throw it up against the map to see what sticks.
Oh yeah, I think that's the right thing to do. I mean, I think that's what we're trying to accomplish here. It's just, how do we figure out those 25 words?
Probably the shifting method. I mean, I'm kind of liking Carlos's approach.
Yeah. And I think to your larger point, that's where you start to get a sense, at the extreme, there's some interviews where an interviewer wants to have more of this design conversation with you about, maybe the architecture or code design or scale performance. And there's some interviews where, hey, I just need you to get to a working solution. Then I'm going to ask you a harder question. This was just the warm up. And, how do you know which one you're in? How do you know when they're assessing, right? You're just literally writing code versus, having that conversation. And hopefully the conversation with the interviewer will kind of clue you in. And you can always say, if this changes, we would, hey, once we've recorded all the combos, we could save that and we could run it by any map as that changes. But yeah. In this case, what I'd like to do is to get some working code showing this concept, basically how to get those 25 combo words, for those 25 combinations. How do we get that? And one thing to be thinking about as the candidate is, how do I figure out an approach that is least likely to have bugs or to be the most straightforward for me based on my skills to implement and get to a working solution, or at the very least be the easiest to debug. And it could be using a recursive approach. You could also use it nested. You can always use recursion, or you can use essentially having some kind of stack or queue. Whatever you'd like to do to explore the tree. But I think identifying that there's a tree, that's like the aha moment where things go from being confusing to being like, oh, this makes sense. And if you have this is a remote interview, but even if you have paper, right, that might have been an easier thing to do, to write, okay, I'm going to do, this. I tried to notate what you were saying, Carlos. This is like the form that makes sense to me. But you're basically building this tree, and just to even write that out with the DSA example is a great idea. Because once you know what the data is, then you start to think, okay, how can I process this? At least for me, is often just figuring out what that tree or graph looks like is for me very confusing. And until I get that sorted, I don't really have an approach. Okay, let's see. I'd like one of you to implement a solution to this. Basically, inside of word match, you basically have a function. We've kind of identified there's this two-step approach. And you could even implement this with a magic function, right? You could have this function like combos, make combos. You take a word and it's going to return a bunch of combinations. Right now it does nothing. You could implement word match as if make combos worked, and then go back and implement make combos. Do each of you maybe each of you can implement a different function? One can do word match and one can do make combos.
Sure.
Should we give that a try? Okay.
Okay.
Which Carlos, which function would you like to implement?
I could try the make combos.
Okay.
Yeah.
Michael, are you comfortable implementing word match?
Yeah, my question would be this.
Yeah.
How are we going to be, what data types are we going to be returning from the make combos? Is it going to be an array of strings?
Yeah.
Okay, that's beautiful. I could definitely do that.
All right.
Okay. Let's see.
We're doing a double interview.
All
Efficiency folks are cheering everywhere.
So, okay.
Let me get rid of this.
Oh, keep that, Michael. I liked what you started there.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, basically keep going with what you started.
Well, okay. Stand by. Now the map. Let me have a look here. That's going to be an array. Okay.
It'll actually be an object.
It'll be an object.
So that you get constant lookup, yeah.
Okay. So so the object is going to contain what key value pairs?
Here's an example of what it'll look like. I'm going to put this down here so it's easy to see. So whatever value you want to put in here. It could, maybe they'll just be strings. Like we'll pretend there's their definitions. But the presence of the key is sufficient.
Okay. So.
And sometimes interviewers will answer that. Like I'm just like, I'm defining the input for you, especially if I'm really looking at your coding and your algorithm. It's fair for me to define the input and output. Sometimes interviewers will say, whatever you want. And just know that you can make it more or less complicated, but that might slow you down the more complicated it is. So sometimes it's good to bring up your ideas about scalability, but then say, for the purposes of this, we'll make it an array to make it easy or something. To save time for this interview.
Okay, let's get that going there. So it's an object, not an array of objects, right?
Right.
Okay, so it'd be, so we would have to use, and keys. Okay, object.
Oh, I see. Nice. I like what you're doing. I see. Basically, at the end of the day, we're going to have two functions we can put together very easily.
Okay, so we get the object keys object. Okay. Keys. Okay. Okay, the combos. Const combos equal make combo. And actually at that point I don't even.
Yeah, we can even pretend that the combos you're receiving are the results of make combos. Make
Okay,
combos.
So we got to make combos. Okay. And
Oh, okay, yeah.
combos.
In fact, this is more like this function is applying those combos to the map to figure out what we're going to return. Like
Yeah.
what? Yeah, okay.
Okay, so and what I would do is, okay, so we got that. We got the object. Reduce. Combo would be the callback function. And okay, we're doing combo. Okay. Okay, actually it's going to be accumulator combo. I'm going to tamp up the screen a little bit. There we go. And accumulator combo. And okay, return. And the keys are all basically, okay. So what we would do is, combo. Okay, we're turning the combo that basically, and we're going to be returning an empty array. I'm missing something in here. Some kind of filter method.
Yeah.
Do I even need a reducer? No, I don't. I can just use a filter.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I could probably put it there and filter it out. Key. Now to make the other iterate. Okay, hold on. Key.
And why don't we go for just another few minutes, and then we'll break to discuss.
Yeah, because I'm gonna have to use the loo anyways after we,
Okay.
Yeah, and I actually got to get back to work.
Oh, let's break now then. And I realize I've handicapped both of you, because if this were an interview, you would normally not have someone else, breaking the code so that you could be running your code iteratively. And that would be a huge help, because you could be testing your assumptions, right? Right now I'm like, just write a bunch of code and then we'll run it at the end. And if there's a bug, you're like, well, it could be anywhere in this code I've just written.
Right.
Why don't we start with Michael? Do you want to explain where you're at and what your next steps would be?
Okay, so basically we got the combo, which is basically coming from Carlos's function. Okay. We're doing the keys, which are the object keys, which is from the dictionary you gave us.
Yep.
What we wanted to do essentially is to filter through and basically see what combinations that Carlos came up with, to see which ones are equal to the ones that are within the dictionary you gave us.
Yeah. Yeah. I like your approach. Here's what I would say. I like your approach with the filter. I think there's some, you clearly have the big idea, but I think some of your implementation, it got a little lost. And some of that, in terms of a communication with the interviewer, get combos. That's not a great name, right? Because what we're really saying is word match is going to call get combos that Carlos implemented, and then pass that off to, you know, find matches or something. And maybe that's like a better name here. So sometimes it was hard for me to know what you understood versus not, because by not changing this, I can't see what you're understanding in your mind.
Well, you know, I was kind of having this huge deer in the headlight moment.
You're doing great. I'm just like I don't even know. This is definitely an interview from hell. Can you imagine doing a 2-for-1? And so, you know, for example, changing the name here, again, it makes it harder to follow that we change it. But maybe, you know, initially map is kind of a dumb name. Also, probably you kind of remove combos, and that's actually going backwards from maybe like what a good design was. So that kind of looked a bit funny. I think just in terms of the implementation, one thing is that you're using, you know, you're on the one hand demonstrating a great fluidity with JavaScript. You know about, you know, well, obviously, you know, the keys function, that's pretty valuable. You're using filter, and you're playing with reduce. And earlier you talked about using shift. And the one thing I would say is that if you're trying to get to a working solution quickly, sometimes in an interview specifically, it can be helpful to just use a for loop, just iterate. Like you could, you know, like sometimes it's like we make things more difficult for ourselves. You're not going to necessarily impress me. If you used filter and it worked in 5 seconds, yes, I'd be impressed. But if you're going to take a lot of time for it, you're just kind of hurting yourself. And maybe you just, you know, have a for loop through keys, right? And then, sorry, I have a little bit of there we go. Right. So have a loop through keys, and then, you know, if that key equals the, we weren't really using, so we still have to have our, basically for every, you know, for combo and combos, right? For key and keys. Oh my God. If key is combo, like add that to the list.
Okay,
Return the list. And sometimes just like simple, right? Keep it simple just because it's an interview and it's so easy to get caught up. But you were actually doing something really nice. And if in an interview, we probably would have had more time for you to really finish this through. But sometimes just the simple one. Yeah. Now I'm like, you got it. We can move on. Cool. I'm trying to think, is there anything on your side that would have been helpful from an interviewer, or anything that you felt like you would do differently next time, sort of as a candidate learning?
Yeah, I would definitely have like drilled myself on algorithms.
Oh,
I didn't expect this at all.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And one tip that can be helpful, especially for something like this, where, you know, if you go through, again, going through the input and saying, here's the words that I would create, you know, even if it was like the DSA case. Okay, so we're going to have, you know, DSA, SDA, ADS, ASD, you know, we have all these combos, and then here's my map. And just like going through with my human brain, I would take DSA, I would look through this map one at a time. Those steps can then kind of create the exact steps you would take. That's one way to come up with an algorithm, is just like, what's my dumb human brain doing? Sometimes that works. Okay, what about, Carlos, how did make combos go?
Well, still kind of working on that. My thinking was, so I've got my base case, right? I wrote down, if there's any case that the word is length is 1 or 0, just return the word, which would be 1 letter. But if the length is equal to 2, I'm just going to try and return an array that involves the letters, you know, like the word, two variants, one like EA and then AE, right? The words mixed, the letters inverted, yep. Right? And then my thinking was, well, then that's my base case. So then anything that's 3 or more, what am I working to do? And what I want to do is I need to create n number of permutations of that one word where I've shuffled the letters over so that each letter starts at the word. And then I am going to, what my idea was to then go ahead and call recursively, right? I want to create, let's say I've got a 5-letter word. I've got 5 different versions of the word with each letter put as the first letter in the word. And then what I want to do is I want to, for each of these 5, I want to call recursively the letter plus whatever the result is of the 4 letters in each one. And so I'm thinking, like, I probably have like a mess of like, I'm trying to loop in here, and so I'm probably creating this hybrid. Like, do I really need to do this recursively, or can I just do this, like with nested loops kind of thing? So I was getting a little bit of a hole here with that. And then I don't know if I'd have to look up Google, but just to look at my slice to make sure my slice is correct. So
sure. And that's where, especially when you have an interpreter like this, you can, I don't know if you can, you can test things right away.
Yeah, that's true. I could have just run over there and said, hey, slice -1. That hopefully gives me F. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so.
Yeah, or as you're running this, you could be executing your code and printing just to be like, did I get, were these edge cases right? Okay, good, or something. The more you can, which is nice. Like generally we like to develop iteratively anyway, so might as well do that in an interview when you get the chance. This is a complicated problem. There's a couple things. It's really, in terms of how to prepare for this sort of thing, is one, I really think writing out that tree so that it's almost like there's, you have your node, the next level in the tree is any of D, S, or A. And then for each of those nodes, it's any of D, S, or A minus the thing that that we just did. Right? For D, it's S or A. I mean, you basically were trying to write a tree. It's really sucky to do it in text. One thing is having this concept so defaults become really important in interviews because you don't have a lot of time. So whether this was considering like a shift versus they're not, it's just like any other layer, and my first layer is empty, can be helpful. And also that concept of, you're going to have this if case where you're going to return this order, plus you're going to need to have, right? You're going to also need to try the reverse order, 1, 0, or 0, 1. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's why I had like word, because the first case would be that. Like, so if I've got 2 letters, A and B, the first case would be A and B.
Oh, I see. I gotcha. Yep. I don't know that you could also just go to the end. Why not? But
yeah.
Anytime you have ifs that can introduce bugs and it's not that you want to limit your ifs or it's not that you want to write less code necessarily. It's that you want to, make things really obvious to yourself.
Right.
So sometimes it's like, just write everything out. Don't be tricksy. And other times it's like, remove, just have 1 base case, not 2. But I think you're on the right track. And then the second step, of course, with whether it's recursion or whatnot, is like to just practice having in your head, okay, when I write recursion, I'm going to have a helper function. I'm going to have my base case. I'm going to have my inductive step. I'm going to apply it to this tree that I've just mapped out. Okay, here's how it's going to look. Let's go. It's so easy to get lost.
Yeah.
I think you guys did great in what was definitely a non-ideal interview situation. So hopefully that was somewhat helpful.
Good job, guys. Good job, Carlos and Michael.
And I would say all in all, first of all, you never know what the interviewer is really looking for. Maybe they want you to have a working solution. Maybe they just wanted to have a nice chat. Maybe it's a really hard problem and they just want to see that you can make some progress and handle a challenge. And so just stay positive, keep a smile on your face, keep having a great conversation with the interviewer. Sometimes just connecting with them as a person, that's half of the equation. Cool. And I enjoyed chatting with both of you.
Thank you so much. Likewise, that was cool.
Yes.
Definitely good experience.
Thanks, guys. It takes a lot of guts. I know, even just watching, I'm like, wow, this is, in the moment, it's just, there's so much going on. Even though it's a mock interview, there's, the problem you guys have never heard of, and just, you've heard of these terms and you understand the concept, but then it's like the implementation and the different ways you can go with it. And one thing I noticed watching this whole interview process is just how time sensitive everything is. Because as, especially as self-taught developers, we have this luxury after work to spend 7 hours solving a problem like this or something, or coming back to it the next day. Whereas, on the spot in an interview, the time element is just right in front of your face. And so there's a real pressure there. Great job, guys.
And I just want to say, especially this video is going to go live. There's probably maybe some hiring managers out there. I mean, both of you, Carlos and Michael, you were engaging with the problem. You understood the code. You understood the algorithm. You know, we were working through communication and time management. Like Candy said, that's just how to level up in an interview. But interviewing in itself is a skill. And that's what we were focusing on. The skill of programming, you know, you guys are already doing great. It's always a long journey, and on the job things look so much more different, more different than an interview, right? You have context, you have relationships, you have your work ethic. So
I would have loved to have MDM open.
yeah, well, and you know, sometimes, especially for remote interviews, sometimes you ask the interviewer, oh, can I just look up this documentation, or can I have this, you know, this thing ready? But also as you practice, sometimes that'll reduce the need for other things. What is MDM?
The Mozilla Developer Network. It's kind of like the ultimate cliff notes for JavaScript.
Yeah, cool. So sometimes, you know, definitely just ask the interviewer if you can, you know, look stuff up and whatnot. Usually they'll be like, it's fine. You know, the only thing is if you're spending 10 minutes looking things up, they're going to be like, oh, you know, you seem a little rusty. So before you have an interview, talk to the recruiter and figure out what questions am I likely to be asked, what concepts, look at the job description, things like that. Okay, I'm going to practice that ahead of time just to
right. I mean,
interview skill. It's not even your programming skills, right? The interviewing itself is a skill.
Yeah, because I felt like I came into this like totally unprepared.
That was terrific. You were demoing all of the challenges that people encounter. You're doing it for all of us, so we don't have to.
I have a few follow-up questions for Lusen. If you guys want to stick around, you're welcome to, but you know, I don't know what your schedule looks like, so.
I'd love to, but I got to get running. I got to get going. So I just want to thank you guys for this. This is an amazing opportunity. I love this. This was really fun.
Awesome.
Thanks so much. I hope you both keep in touch with me. I'd love to know if you are searching for work right now, how it goes. And I'd be happy to do a more real help with you if you'd like, you know, just as
Absolutely.
a thank you for your time.
Yeah, totally. That'd be fantastic. Thank you so much.
All right, Carlos. We'll see you later.
See you later.
All right.
Bye.
Michael, did you want to stick around for the follow-up here? Or what's that?
I can hang.
Okay, cool. So, geez, where to even start with this? So, I don't know, Lusen, you got any more things you want to add? Like, grind the gears in my brain here, thinking about where to start reviewing what just happened.
Yeah, I was taking notes while they were writing code. Although I think we did a nice little review just then. Yeah, my main takeaway is I think something that candidates don't always realize is that the interviewer is trying to understand what they're thinking and follow along. And, you know, I can read code, like, you know, I don't need every statement to be expressed to me. I'm a programmer as well, but sometimes it is a real challenge understanding what the candidate knows. And so anytime that you know, I feel like, oh, I'm interacting with someone and I can see that they see the big picture and we're having a conversation that builds on itself. Or we can talk about the algorithm and then you know, the pieces are, you know, if we're on the same page, that can make a big difference. And so practicing talking about code and algorithms with someone is really great practice. That can make a big difference up front so that I don't have to wait for someone to write all of their code before being like, oh, they did get it. And that's cool. I might jump to assumptions otherwise a little too soon.
Okay. So using something like, it was CoderPad, right, that you guys were using?
We were using CoderPad.
Okay.
We could also have had, you know, for remote interviews, it can, sometimes people just use like a shared Google document. Sometimes it's sharing your own local development environment, sharing your screen.
And the benefit of using something like CoderPad or, you know, something interactive like that is that you can run it right away and test things early and test things often. Whereas a whiteboard, it's not like, you don't have that luxury necessarily. So what are some strategies when you do have that extra bit of interactivity with like a built-in coding editor?
Yep.
You know, so for one, you would say run early, run often. What are some other hints for maximizing that?
Run early, run often. Anytime you're in your head thinking, is it slice or is it these arguments or is it an off by one error? Go ahead and get that sorted right away, because after you've written code, trying to figure out where your bug is from, that'll just take more time. So reduce your uncertainty as you go. The other thing is to write small single purpose methods, just like maybe you normally would in development. So I really liked how Carlos and Michael ended up writing these two functions. So our main function, word match, was going to be the main function that we call to find the matches. And it was a two-step algorithm, find the combos, and then use those combos to find matches in the map or the dictionary. And so it was going to call these two smaller functions that were more specific. And the nice thing about that, it's not just, hey, that's nice design, which is good. You're showing that off to the interviewer. But even more importantly for an interview where, in my case, I was trying to focus on getting a working solution,
Right.
is that now, say, each of these functions can be unit tested separately. And by unit test, I mean even just like calling them with like a print statement, trying some different input. And then you can, in your head, you're like, oh, I feel very confident about make combos. It's returning all the combos. I still have a bug. It must be in find matches. It helps you localize, helps you build confidence in your code, helps you keep things in your head straight and organized. I think in an interview situation, writing well-organized code is largely for yourself to keep things straight, so that you don't get confused, because it's so easy to do that for all of us.
Right. So one thing I noticed throughout when they were both solving those problems, Michael's technique, he started off writing pseudocode. And so I was just watching, his step-by-step thought process. But you are emphasizing, pseudocode is good, but the priority should be an answer first. Is that a fair assumption?
Well, here's how I look at it. Whenever possible, you're asked a question that you're familiar with. Because that's the thing here. It's not like, these questions that have to do with essentially coming up with some kind of algorithm and solving some problem. It's not like people are born knowing any of this. So if you've seen something similar to that before, oh, I've seen a problem where we have to iterate through an array, or we have to make a match using a dictionary or an object. If you've seen something like that before, it's going to be it's going to probably be easier to come up with a solution and to talk about it. And so that's great if you can do that. And I can say, I'll come back to this and say why that's very valuable. Sometimes, just because you can't do that, it doesn't mean you give up. Sometimes you're like, I need to get my hands dirty and think through this problem a little bit, like by writing code. And so that can be okay to jump into that. Or sometimes you're trying to communicate, you're trying to explain your approach, and the interviewer doesn't get it. Say the interviewer is just seeing a different solution, and like maybe in this case, like with Michael, I didn't quite understand, the shift didn't seem enough to me. But maybe in Michael's head, he's like, no, but of course we're going to do all these other things, and then we're going to do the match. Like I know Michael did have the big picture, but we weren't quite communicating that well. Sometimes that's okay. You don't want to waste 20 minutes arguing with your interviewer. You just say, I think I have an approach that works. Believe in yourself, right? I think I have an approach that works. Why don't I start implementing it so that we can, so that might help the interviewer understand. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you just got to do what you have, and people have different approaches to solving problems. It's okay to play to your strengths. That said, whenever you can explain your ideas, it can be impressive for an interviewer. Again, they get to connect with you. They get to give you a little bit of guidance. Oh, but what about this edge case? What if we change the problem in this way? It feels, it's impressive. And it's from a time management point of view, it can be more helpful. Mm-hmm. Even pseudocode, I think, can be slower than, using clicks and hand gestures and, shorthand to go through a sample input and say, this is what I would, write this loop and I would do this thing. That might be faster than writing like 4 lines of pseudocode. Not that you need to feel like a race. If you're slow and steady and not getting confused or lost, you're probably going to be fine in an interview. But thinking about that time management up front can be really helpful.
Cool. Michael, what was the biggest challenge for you?
Well, for me, it was basically a case of I didn't quite know what I was getting into. I didn't know this was going to be as much of a technical interview, or basically it was going to be algorithm generated. So here I am, basically picking out bits, pieces, and fragments of prior knowledge that I would have had on my second monitor to research, and just saying, here, remember everything and come up with this.
Yeah, you did great. And, honestly, if what I would just recommend is if you know that you have interviews like this coming up, And there are a lot of companies that are going to give some kind of, proof of programming type of homework challenge or interview. A little bit of practice would, I bet already from this experience, you're like, oh, this is what I have to do. I can do that. And to not get caught up, the main thing I would say is to not get caught up in special functions or even trying to memorize like advanced algorithms. A lot of times just seeing how we can use arrays, iteration and objects or maps. The building blocks are usually sufficient for a lot of these problems. It's actually, we try to sort of, people study, how to solve a red-black tree, and then suddenly like everything's a red-black tree. And it's like, you're making this complicated. Don't do a binary search. Just iterate through this array. Keep it simple,
Cool. Yeah, I think that's all the questions I have. Anything else, Michael or Lusen, you want to add?
I would just add that this is just one of many kinds of interviews, and to practice on all of them, and to, like I said earlier, do what you can on this front, but don't give up. There's a lot of companies out there. Lots of companies have different hiring processes, and there's a place and a role for you out in the world. There's not just like one job out there.
Right.
I have one question.
Yeah.
I've noticed that a lot of the companies that I've been seeing there are saying no whiteboards, or they're starting to like basically march that process out the die. Is things like the application we're using going to be the successor to that?
It might be. I mean, sometimes when people used to come on site to do an interview, a lot of interviews are becoming totally remote right now. But sometimes the recruiter will say, bring your own computer. You'll use your own development environment to write some code, or I think there's lots of different options. Many places do want some proof of programming. It could be, oh, you have a portfolio, you have a GitHub, we can look at code you've already written. We can have a conversation with you about it, and you can talk about your design decisions and how you approach certain things. Some places will want you to write code on the spot, whether it is using CoderPad or using a development environment or a whiteboard. But yeah, whiteboards are weird, right? Like whiteboards are great for let's make a picture. Let's have a high level conversation. Let's draw some boxes and arrows and an architecture. Maybe even an algorithm at a high level, but it's weird to write code. We never write code on a whiteboard on the job. So
yeah, and I think like a lot of people, I know when I first started learning just the basics of JavaScript, and I was wondering, what is the interview process really like? So I think I went on YouTube and typed in software developer interview or something, and one of the top results is the mock Google interview. Ooh. And so they were doing the interview on a whiteboard. And I said, if this is what I have to do, I don't know if I could even, you could practice anything and probably, muster enough internal strength to get through it. But it's just, the idea of it is just awkward to me. I don't think anyone finds it natural. It's just a weird thing.
If you know you have whiteboards coming up, and you have the time and interest, you really want to work at that company, get a whiteboard, or find a whiteboard. I don't know if they have whiteboards at the library, but or even just use tape some paper to the wall. You can practice for anything, right? You can do anything. You can't do everything, but you can do anything. You can focus on one thing. But that said, you don't necessarily have to. There's plenty of places that don't do traditional whiteboards in that way. But they might ask to see some code that you've written before. They might give you a take-home problem. Hey, can you in your own time, can you work on this and show us a result? They're trying to balance. Companies are trying to balance needing to assess something with also trying to be efficient.
Right.
So it's kind of a dance we're all playing.
Yeah. And like you had mentioned earlier in the recording that, employers, some people do interviews like we just did, with remotely or with third-party editor or something. Some people do in person. Some people don't even have code interviews. They just say,
exactly.
here's a coding challenge. So I think, it is an important point to emphasize is that, like you had mentioned multiple times, this is just one style. This is just one way of doing it. And employers are all different like that. So,
and once you have one job, that's going to be skills that you have. It's going to be references. That's a network. That's that's also proof that you are, employable and doing great things. So it can all continue to build. And so, find what works for you. And as you keep, for any candidates out there who are applying right now, keep practicing, because you might be continuing to apply next month, and your, whiteboarding might seem totally mysterious to you right now, but if you put a little bit of time into it, every week, it'll become, better. So sometimes it's a marathon, not a sprint.